Greetings, dear friends. We are together again this time at the 76th video of the Divine Order and the Universe Reading and Commentary series. And this month, my dear sister Oya will accompany me while reading and commenting on the passages. Welcome!
Greetings from Izmir, dear friends. We are together again.
Yes, let's start from the point we stopped last week. None of the needs of any being in nature is met with neglect. Orders and devices which are suitable to all evolutionary needs and wants are immediately established because the universe is for evolution and their fulfillment of all evolutionary needs is an imperative. As to the forms and directions of the new schemes and devices to be established on the face of these needs, we have said that human beings have entered the state of candidacy for more superior lives and reached the gates of the infinitely illumined lands. However, for mankind to attain these high and illumined lives which they deserve, these gates must be opened. So, a small deed remains to be done for mankind to be able to migrate to these unique lands of happiness which they longingly pursue, drenched in blood and sweat. And this is but to open wide these gates which are ready to be opened by giving it a flick and barging in. However, the realization of this will be possible, again, within the flow of some events which are very ordered and harmonious. And this is to be as such as necessary for the well-being of mankind. Certainly many humans will benefit from the great preparations which are ensured by the harmonious devices within this immense order, and consequently, they will not miss the opportunity to flow away within a great atmosphere of joy in order to soar in the infinite lives of the etheric cosmoses in the realm of infinite possibilities. We have now stated clearly that in the radical changes which are about to start to occur soon in natural conditions, nothing will be purposeless and imprudent, and even the smallest event will be put into effect within an unfailing and infallible device and harmony by the superior beings in duty, in accordance with the necessities coming from the unitary. And the opening of the gates we just mentioned above means the comprehension, internalization of this truth, and willingly and happily complying with the devices that exist accordingly. Therefore, the new harmony which will occur with the changes in the natural conditions on the earth has an extraordinarily great value and significance in regard to granting these possibilities of deliverance. Remember that these states which will be apparently disordered, worrying and even disturbing, are actually valuable means which will help mankind to acquire high gains and are for the benefit of mankind. For the countenance of mankind which will be changed and the harmony which will be established by the new devices will occur only after the closing of a world cycle. So, because of this, there are the last preparations the world will go through. These preparations have two aspects. The first is to make mankind gain their still lacking knowledge, observations and faith, by telling them that this world cannot be a convenient habitat for them anymore, and the other aspect is to put into effect a new world which is convenient for the simple bodies who will come later.
This is a clear but very encompassing, very profound passage that we need to study sentence by sentence. At first, let's take a glance at the process of evolution, more correctly, development of human beings. We, as the family of humankind, went through a great adventure of development, and the whole process was harmonious for each one of us. Dear friends, we learnt making tools by chiseling flint stones, then we learnt to utilize these tools in various ways. We discovered fire, will, etc., and here and now, at this superficial time of the world, we reached such a point of this development and evolution that, as we read in this passage, all those earlier experiences feel too distant for us. Now, we are rich in many ways and have many abilities to utilize matter in powerful ways. And, gaining these abilities of utilizing matter brought the family of humankind up to a certain level of development. And now, we live the consequences of our earlier choices and decisions and actions in the most harmonious way. And this harmony emerges by the law of causality, the principle of cause and effect.
Yes, as you just said, those days we discovered how to start a fire or invent the wheel. I mean, all those impressions we had during those earlier times feel like too distant. Even the more recent ones. Technological developments we now take for granted have only started to become widespread only 40 years ago. And in the last 25 years almost everybody, even at the remotest corners of the globe, started using these. As though we didn't live through the times prior to these technological advancements. You and I can easily remember the times our homes didn't have stable electricity. There were many nights we studied under the light of gas lamps. Or those times when our parents were waiting for months to gain the right for a landline telephone to be connected to our homes. And even when we did, we had to use telephone central services for calls outside of our towns, etc. Within our, let's say, 50 to 60 years of lifetime, we lived through those stages in a compressed way so much that those stages look too primitive and too distant to remember right now. This is because matter has this ability to respond the needs of the human beings in a very swift manner. And of course, as we get near to the end of this world cycle, this fulfillment of the developmental needs of the human beings gets swifter and swifter. This is a preparation for those days to come. And, as we read in this book, all those natural disasters that will happen has two main purposes. First one is to make it clear for the humankind that this world is not a suitable settlement anymore. Because the material system of our world is exhausted and cannot respond to the developmental level our beings reached. I mean, if I use the world school metaphor, as though the higher plans tell us that now you have to go to college, you cannot stay in this elementary classroom. See, these tiny building, tiny desks and chairs cannot accommodate you anymore. And this school has to be deconstructed in order to be rebuilt for the elementary class students of the next term. But we say, no, I like this school, I cannot leave. Tiny or not, this is my first desk, I love it. So, if we become identified with all kinds of worldly things, the disaster and events that we will encounter at the end of this world cycle will break our hold on those things. And as we read in this passage, a small deed remains to be done for mankind. That is, to complete and complement any lessons, experience and impressions left missing or unfinished, be it from past lifetimes or the current life of human beings. And the second purpose is resetting and refreshing the planet to make it suitable for the development and evolution of the simpler bodies that will be born in this world. Just as we did, the new humanity of the next world cycle will go through all those necessary developmental stages, first by developing instincts, later intuitions, and much later rationality, and continue towards awareness and comprehension. In other words, the world school has to, so to speak, be demolished at the end of this world cycle, so it can be rebuilt for the new students.
Of course, the progress we made at the human stage was harmonious from the vantage point of our beings. Yet from our human perspective, and with terms used in this book, it was an existential adventure we had, as drenched in blood and sweat. I mean, we spent so much effort for reaching today's point, we lived through so many lifetimes. And now, we are living this lifetime. I am sure that you remember the book titled Reliving Past Lives. Psychologist Dr. Helen Wambach shared fascinating results of her large-scale past life group hypnotherapy sessions in that book. And one of the questions she asked was, why did you incarnate in this era? In this time period? There were replies such as, I couldn't find such an age like this, or this is a new era, a new age and very precious. And now, living in this time period, which is the end of the world cycle, is precious for us. And, as you repeated, just a small thing due is left for us. And what we read in the divine order and the universe is full of hope for further levels of existence. Yes, our planet has myriad cycles, it is a sphere of periodical changes, and world cycles we read about in this book are of our planet's larger cycles. It needs to revise, renovate, refresh itself by shaking, by displacing and replacing land and/or water masses on its surface, and as the humankind living on this planet, we witness this big change, and although the appearances of this change manifest as tumultuous, disastrous, These are still in harmony with the greater pattern of the divine systems organizations. Just like the Dr. Wambach's hypnosis subjects said, we also chose to be in this period of time in order to gain more impressions and experiences, both individually and communally.
When I think about recent earthquake in your city Izmir, and the buildings that collapsed, humans that died and injured, I cannot help but compare the experience of Japanese people. They don't use deficient building materials. They continuously improve their building and also rescue techniques. Theirs is an example of the beneficial results when humans develop their conscience, rationality and intuitions in tandem, and display their conscientious abilities more and more for the greater good of their community. And because of this inner and outer preparedness, they experience earthquakes as a part of their usual daily life, not as an unexpected disaster. There we see that work ethics is very important, maybe due to conscientious, or maybe due to ethical reasons, or due to a sense of responsibility. Yet towards the end of a world cycle, appearances the both extremes of the pendulum, of the conscience mechanism become obvious, explicit, more and more visible in the choices and actions of human beings. At the positive component or pole, that is at the component of duty, we go toward displaying altruistic abilities that take others' well-being into account when choosing and acting conscientiously. However, at the negative pole, that is, at the pole of sensuality or earthly cravings, we go toward displaying selfish, self-centered choices and actions as we want more and more, profit, gains, etc. And this slowly put a veil or blinders to our conscientious abilities. So, now, we see myriad examples of the whole spectrum of the pendulum swinging. Because of this, in our culture, we see people who tell themselves that they always do good, and consequently deceive themselves, because no one can always do good. And because, at the same time they act selfishly, they use cheap materials or gets approvals by giving bribes, let's say as constructors that built those unsafe buildings. On the other hand, there are other people who thinks that they are more clever or luckier than others when they pay less for such buildings. And eventually, all those complicated and conflicting choices and decisions bring out consequences all of us live in this or that way. And such troubles and suffering those people experienced or caused gradually teach them precious lessons. At first, they may take these events as punishment, but later, they begin to be more careful, cautious, more rational and mindful by becoming aware of the cause and effect chains behind these and similar events. In this passage, we read expressions like the infinitely illumined lands, and these unique lands of happiness about the higher plans we will pass to, as our development advances. But please notice that these are metaphorical statements used to describe higher levels of comprehension in comparison with our current states of comprehension and conscience. And in this world, people migrate to other countries, thinking that those new places will be lands of happiness when compared to the lands they have been living in so far. Yet, most of the time they become disappointed in those new lands, because as the saying goes, we bring ourselves everywhere we go. Thankfully, the system does not allow us to go those infinitely illumined lands as we are now, and sets for us a final and necessary test for completing this human stage. And it will be about getting out of our comfort zones, leaving our identifications aside, and becoming able to leave this material world when the destined time comes for us. Only then, we can wide open the gates leading to those higher developmental levels. However, for this last test, or for opening the gates leading those lands of happiness by giving it a flick, requires a radical change from us. Because, when it is necessary to change, our psyche resists to change. We see the obvious results of this resistance to change in the chaotic appearances in the whole world. Because it is obvious that if people still think that war or genocide is a solution, that nuclear arms are a logical deterrent, etc., then it means that there are more lessons we need to learn as the family of humankind. Still, there are all kinds of carrots for all kinds of realities. While some people are designing warheads, some invention leads to an improvement in a medical tool or method. It seems like humankind always needs a kind of carrot to motivate them to move forwards, and those needs are endless. And now, we read about those metaphors that address such needs at many realities. But we now know very well that those carrots change as individuals and communities elevate and change their realities.
Yes, in the religious texts, there are many metaphorical and imagery expressions to address many levels of reality. However, in this book, what is meant by the lands of happiness is that a state of comprehension which is reached by almost all humankind about this current situation we are in, because, unless we don't comprehend it, then it will be hard for us to spend effort for changing our habits, addictions, our attachments to material goods, be it tangible or intangible. In other words, that gates will be open only when we are able to increase our capacity of comprehension, and to become knowledgeable about both our inner and outer world, and of course, to reach a state in order to do applications of this knowledge. This entails us to spend more efforts. Yes, what is left to do is just a slight push on those gates, but we need to do this, both individually and communally as the humankind. Yet, most of the time, whenever we encounter a troubling event, we are still asking why this or that happens to me, instead of asking what is the lesson this or that event brings along. I'd better examine this closely. Of course, we cannot do this at once, we have to go through many levels of development. Yet, right now, together with our dear friends, joining us in this reading and commentary series of the Divine Order and the Universe, I'd like to think that we are more or less a similar level of development, and at this point of our spiritual evolution, we are expected to understand the importance of taking a deep breath before we make a choice for action in the face of life events. Because only then we can respond, otherwise we only react. And again, we are expected to become more comprehending by widening our comprehension, instead of protesting, rebelling against the life events. I mean, at this point of our development, if we can internalize the lessons of life events, we can even start laughing out loud. Of course, we cannot do this for each and every life event, but still, within us, we can be aware of that small voice of our essence being, as though telling us that find your center within the rapid cascade of life events, take a deep breath and find your center. Then, we can easily remember that as human beings we are here to gain impressions, experiences, then this is another opportunity to gain some more. Actually, we can interpret opening those gates as the opening of the doors of our perception, of our comprehension, because when we spend some effort to look at the life events from a higher level, then we can take some deep breaths. We need that brief pause that we are in the moment. And then, we can continue to experience that event firsthand, from our usual reality level in order to digest it properly. Such a short change in perspective may help us in making more efforts in living and internalizing our level of reality in a swift manner.
When you said protest or rebellion, it reminded me the Sufi story about Moses and Al-Khidr. Al-Khidr is this mysterious figure. It is obvious that he has of the higher plans. And the belief is that he acts and moves so fast that when someone helps someone just at the time the help is most needed, they are praised as you appeared just in time like Al-Khidr. Yes, in the Sufi story, Al-Khidr travels with Moses, and Moses witnesses while this mysterious companion sinks a boat, kills a baby, takes down a wall, etc., and Moses cannot comprehend the reasons of seemingly evil deeds and protests. He rebels against these incomprehensible deeds of Al-Khidr. In this story, Al-Khidr symbolizes a plan with duty that has a wider perspective regarding cause and effect mechanism, and Moses symbolizes the human being in the world reality that has a narrow perspective regarding causality principle. In this sense, the protest and objection of Moses are actually our protest and objection to the life events. However, the vantage point of Al-Khidr is higher than of Moses. This mysterious figure in this Sufi story represents the perspective of an organizer system in duty, and even though Moses is a prophet, his reality and his organizer plan is lower in comparison. Yes, we cannot see those cause and effect connections among life event, and this is a hindering factor, yet our main purpose in life right now is not to see all of those connections. Our purpose is to spend efforts for intuiting those connections, and in proportion to the degree of our intuitions, to spend efforts for doing small-scale exercises of those intuitions. And the starting point of these exercises is self-observation, looking at our inner and outer worlds from an objective angle. And because we cannot see the cause and effect connections right away in the events we live in our daily life, we can at least study the situations we protest and object after the fact, at hindsight. For example, when we are dumped or laid off etc., we can protest, this is understandable. But later, after a while, if we can have an outsider's look at those troubling situations, we may see that those seemingly bad events actually benefited us. The important point is to do this, without losing too much time, not lifetimes later or years later, but as soon as possible. Because, as the saying goes, you cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it, therefore, you need to have a perspective either out or above the problem. That's why we frequently suggest to our dear friends that if you live similar events back to back, it may be beneficial. If you can look at yourself from outside, as an observer, and ask, what is your attitude before, during, and after these events? What was your reason or motivation to act or react like this? Is your reply instinctual, emotional, or rational? Could you have these in a balanced way? Where did you lose the balance? And other questions you may think of. This is the start of gaining mastery over matter, because the divine order and the universe states that even our feelings, emotions, and thoughts are of matter. We need to learn not to be swept by such material factors. Even a rational thinker, let's say an academician, a university professor, can get swept by an emotional delirium and kills, let's say, her beloved wife. Of course, we observe the immediate consequences. His freedom becomes limited, and maybe he spends rest his life in prison. Yes, we don't have the wide perspective of Al-Qidr, but we may list the possible cause and effect connections for this person. Because of his imprisonment, he will certainly be deprived of many possibilities that might have developed his talents and abilities further. Obviously, he had an unfinished experience regarding mastery over his instinctual reactions. He needs to relearn this lesson, starting from the square one. So, this may be a new opportunity given to him for finishing this lesson for good. Again, we don't know about the karmic bonds between this professor and his wife. It may be that a developmental need of that woman's being is fulfilled by getting her body killed. It sounds too much, eh? Fulfillment of a being's need by getting killed or murdered. I mean, when seen from the perspective of Moses, we protest this idea, we rebel against it. On the other hand, when seen from her essence being, we can only have an intuition about such a need. Yet there is also other beings that observe this event, as witnesses or bystanders, from the conscientious side of worldly appearances, and this event triggers other cause and effect connections regarding efforts in preventing such crimes, in educating public about the laws and regulations, in providing justice for all parties involved. As we see, an event is not only for the victim and the offender, it is multifaceted. And most of us are the witnesses, bystanders, observer to such events, because we hear and watch such news almost every day. Do we ask questions to ourselves for to understand our reactions or response to such news? Personally, I cannot do this as deep as I need to do. As we swipe or browse things on social media, we swipe life events as well. Then, we miss many situations that may bring an awareness within us. In that sense, we need to be awake to our own self.
You are so right in this swiping life events metaphor. Last year we had those forest fires in many points of our country, and also a few big earthquakes. These were intense communal events, but it feels like they are already in the distant past, as though we didn't gain deep impressions from those events. Because, Despite the fact that these were severe warnings about many global and political issues, did we or could we change at least a few things for better about such events we can live in near and far future? Not much. Even the emotional reactions we displayed during and right after such events lose their intensity and cannot push or drive us towards some change. Like you nicely said, we swiped and browsed those events into oblivion, as though they happened and will not happen again. No, they will repeat in ever-increasing intensities unless we learn what we need to learn from those events. When you mentioned the multifaceted life events, I'd wanted to underline something. When troubling and suffering events, we may think these as punishments, but let's not think in this way. For example, I mentioned forest fires, but if we study how nature balances its periodical cycles, we can see that sometimes forest fires are necessary for forests to become regenerated. I mean, there are myriad facets of the life events, and if we make efforts to understand as many as possible, our perspective will get wider in proportion.
When we let nature be, as you said, it renews and regenerates itself by wildfires, by flooding due to changes in rive's beds, by storms and hurricanes. Yet when human beings interfere in nature's cyclical changes, then we see forest fires started by human hand for opening zones for lucrative constructions, or by accidents, because we locate gas stations inside the forested zones, etc., then the soil's nutrients and its rainwater retention capacity diminish, resulting in flash floods, deforestations, migration or extinction of plant and animal species, etc., etc. I mean, when we disturb the balance of natural processes because of our choices and actions we make from our sensuality, from earthly cravings, then it becomes mandatory for nature to make larger and severe swinging between two extreme ends of the pendulum, until nature finds the neutral point, the optimal point in the middle. Let's continue reading. Now we start to explain the qualities and forms of forthcoming natural changes, that is, of the events that are about to manifest, in short, of the great world revolution that is about to happen. Some simple events, which we may term as the first indications of this forthcoming closing of the great world cycle, have already started. These are some atmospheric changes which do not yet have significance in the vision of the mankind, and are assumed temporary disturbances due to the blind forces of nature. These states will gradually increase and continue without ceasing, while making their greater signs felt strongly. For example, the dew-hot days of summer will not arrive somehow, abnormally hot weather in the middle of winter, and cold weather in the middle of summer will start to be observed. Besides long-term droughts in some places, constant rainfalls at other places will create floods and significant damages will occur. Strong winds will blow, becoming dangerous, and in some places they will result in great havoc. Meanwhile, earthquakes will occur, violent seismic upheavals will reveal themselves in this or that part of the earth, among the natural events which mankind will define as disasters. On the seas, unaccustomed events will occur. For example, on shores where no tides occur, the sea will sometimes rise 8 to 10 meters and invade the land. Some cities which are unused to and unprepared for such high tides will be under the threat of floods and suffer great losses. In various locations of the world, from place to place, landslides will occur, and some towns and places will experience quite frightful and worrisome moments. Similarly, during those earth disasters, some places will fissure and smoke, and flames will flow out. In short, all of these great winds, floods, seismic upheavals, earthquakes, the surges of the seas, inundations and ground fissures will gradually trouble mankind and increase their losses. However, none of these will be out of the harmony or out of order. All of them will be expressions of the gradual advances of the steps regulated to the targets we have just mentioned. These states will continue for more or less 40 or 50 years in the world, stealthily but unceasingly, and not in sufficient potency for mankind to be able to penetrate their true significance. Nonetheless, they will increase in intensity, while following a gradual advance which has a preliminary quality for further stages. The ones who have read and embraced the knowledge in this book will not have any hardship to intuit the meaning such states, indicated already at the beginning, and they will acquire the possibilities of preparing themselves for the great day to come with ease, heartfelt peace, and even joy.
Yes, there is a revolution waiting us, the family of humankind. We talk here about the ending or closing of a cycle, and as we read in this book, this is not an event that is far away in future. Indeed, we are witnessing its gradual progress when we look at the faster and faster responses the world matter before it exhausts its possibilities in regard to our higher needs. As we mentioned earlier, a corded landline telephone looks like such a simple device as we walk around with our mobile phones. Actually, we carry a computer in our pocket that we can utilize for almost everything. And this fast and almost instant connection tool informs each of us about the news, be it local or global, be it bad or good, be it beneficial or detrimental, and we can see, albeit not in big numbers, examples of our ability to come together, to unite around some causes when we get informed in this instant fashion on the social media platforms. In that sense, we can always be informed about the global events and the directions they can lead us. In this period of world time, we cannot say that I didn't know, I didn't hear, I didn't see. As we read in the divine order and the universe, during the end of the world cycle, the knowledge we learn today as a preparation will make our transition to the plan of love smoother, not as tumultuous as it will happen for people who don't know. Because of this, we repeatedly ask, not only to you dear friends, but also to ourselves, this question: how can we spend the remaining time productively? How can we prepare ourselves to those lands of happiness by self-study and self-transformation? Because this is the easiest way of walking this developmental path we need to follow. Then, we still encounter the life events, but instead of reacting we respond to those events, and then, they become lighter and lighter to live through.
Similar to the world school that has a beginning and ending at each world cycle, we human beings also have a beginning, as the birth, and an ending, as death of our physical body. For example, as Tülin, in this body, I already lived 50 years. I know that there won't be another 50 years to live, maybe 10, maybe 20 years more I have. The question is, both as an individual and also as a member of the family of humankind, that I need to ask. My process in this physical body is clear, it has a start and an end. Now, as I get near to my end, what will I be doing? Until the world begins to change its surface, how will I be spending my remaining time on Earth? In which kind of efforts? With which kind of perspective? How will I be changing my regrets, my if-only sentences that will be hindering me as shackles? How will I be releasing all emotional and mental baggage I have been carrying so far? Those kinds of questions we need to ask ourselves. Yes, the first half of our life we assume identities and roles, and at the second half, we try to learn leaving these, and see that it is not an easy feat. Hardest one is leaving this physical body in peace. Recently I observed this hardship with my husband's mother. She is 96 years old, and still so healthy that she cannot die even though she really wants to die. Maybe we only say that we want to die, but actually we want to live more. For example, some people live long years, even though they are bedridden with various illnesses. Or they really want to leave their body, but their loved ones, their spouse, parents, children cannot let them go, either because of unfinished emotional issues or because nobody want to feel regrets about their own decisions and leave the decision-making and responsibility to others, mostly to the medical professionals. And unless a patient has a do not resuscitate order, the purpose of doctors and nurses are to keep us alive and healthy as much as possible. As you can understand, all those different issues make this process of dying much harder than it should be. Yes, how can we apply all of this knowledge in our life? All right, the divine order and the universe tells us what will happen at the macro level. Yet when I really and deeply think about those natural processes, don't I have too the inner flash floods of emotions as well? Don't I have surges of tides within me that manifest as emotional outbursts and explosions of anger? Don't I have inner earthquakes as my realities are shaken, as my beliefs collapse? In that sense, as above so below, or more correctly, as inner so outer. So, once again we come back to the most practical question: how will I apply this knowledge to my own life? And this book tells us, alright, this knowledge is given to you, that is, you know that you will die. Yet you don't need to feel despair. If you make inner preparations, then you will not experience this transition as painful, tumultuous, suffering. There is an exercise in one of the spiritual communiqués in the book titled Plan of the Faithful, and also Gurdjieff's Fourth Way. Teachings have similar exercises about visualizing and imagining the day of dying, as though you will die that night and will not wake up tomorrow. They are very practical to discover our inner resistances, fears and strong attachments, and we can work on these. So, as you see, the path we have to walk on is a long one until we come to the threshold of those gates, opening to the plan of love and later, to the plan of duty. Yes. Let's check the questions. If we are going through a period where the good and bad coexist intensely, to which type of people this situation helps? People that are closer to evolution, or the people that are far away from evolution?
First, we cannot separate people into groups like people that are not evolved yet, people that are about to be evolved, etc. Each and every one of us are in the ongoing processes of development and evolution, and we live life events in accordance with our developmental needs. In that sense, there is no bad event, all events are for our development. They bring us lessons we need to learn, about ourselves, about our own being, about the system of the world, etc. Yes, if our guiding beings and beings in duty clean our path to make our progress smoother, this does not mean that we are their favorite human being, no. Because when it is necessary for us to stumble and even fall down in order to stand on our feet again, then they place all sizes of pebbles and rock on our path as well. The point is to learn the lesson an event brings.
There is another question: what is the test and trial of our country? But I think this is a global situation, so I'd like to reply this question in a general way. Carl Jung mentions 4 major archetypes of survival that represent the universal dynamics within each of us. First one is the innocent child archetype. Well, each of us a naive childish part within. Second one is the saboteur. All of us are sabotaged by our automatic or habitual ways of thinking, feeling, and responding. Third one is the victim archetype. All of us assume in varying degrees that what happens to us is not our making, it is an external circumstance or people or reasons beyond our control that is happening. And the fourth archetype of survival is the prostitute. This does not only mean a person offering sexual service in exchange of money. No, this archetype is about people that give up their own values for self-interest. Whenever we decide how we sell ourselves, our time and energy, our values on this life, for the things we assume that we need for living a good life. And I think right now our country's most important test is about this giving up values for acquiring material gains in the shortest period of time. And all of us are going through events that reminding us those values and trying to wake us up from our deep slumber. Again, this situation prevails all over the world. Until the blinders we put on our conscience are taken off, be it gradually or forcibly, we will be encountering many more events, tests, and trials. Another question. I believe in incarnation, and because I incarnate and discarnate, I decided to donate my body to medical science. What is the approach of the divine order and the universe?
This must be a conscientious decision for a person to make. I am a dentist, and in the medical school, I had experienced working on a donated cadaver. For many medical college students, this is a precious opportunity for learning human anatomy. That body continues to teach something as a cadaver even after its physical death. Yes, as a physical vehicle, such a body continues giving service to medical students. But we should not forget the need of honoring such donated bodies, because this may be needed from the perspective of its essence being and even of other beings of the organs and cells. Praying may help, having a grave for it even though it stays empty, planting a tree on behalf of the body, etc. Different cultures have different rituals for this kind of honoring. And if someone makes such a decision, this must be announced to our loved ones, family members, and even we can put it on our will as to be legally recorded. And it may be a very good idea to talk about such topics openly. For example, as Tülin mentioned, we have now elderly parents, grandparents, and other elderly relatives. We may kindly ask them about their wishes after they leave this world. Is there anything you wish us to do after your death? This is also a way of honoring their wishes.
Of course, the divine order and the universe does not give any suggestion or advice or knowledge about donating our bodies to medical science. Such decisions are so personal and closely related to the needs of the essence being that built a body for that lifetime. And the divine order leaves the responsibility of such a choice to the being itself. The plan says, you decide, it is your call. After saying this, I must tell you that my choice was donating my organs. Yes, I am an organ donor in case of my death. And after making this decision, I started to prepare myself for the awareness that may be most suitable for supporting my decision, and now, frequently, I check my inner responses, such inner talk. Yes, you donated your organs. Now, begin gradually setting them free. Do not get overly attached to your organs. Yes. Responsibility of our decisions is ours. So, before making such a decision, instead of arguing for or against it based on this or that belief or religious norms, it is much better to check it within our inner world, our conscience, our intellect, our intuition. Yes. With these words, let us wish you a good evening.
Wishing you all a good week.